You are playing D&D wrong, but I want to help you fix that before you end up quitting the hobby. So what am I talking about? Burnout. It's a common experience for groups to fizzle out. You get a few sessions, maybe a few months into play, and the game just stops. There's a lot of stuff that plays into this, like school, work, new relationships, group fallout, etc. And that explains a lot of longer games biting the dust. But what if I told you there's another huge reason why games, short and long, fall into game burnout? This isn't strictly going to be about D&D, but I will be using a lot of D&D framework to explain this. Workload. That's it. It's all about workload in a game. Your workload to payoff ratio is awful. This to me is the #1 indicator if a game will fizzle out or not. Players, don't tune out yet. I know this sounds like a DM advice video, but it's not. This is a problem that affects everyone in your game, and I have advice for all of you. But first, Game Masters. We are primed to be the programming of this game, making sure that players can sit back and play while we do all the back-end work. And that is a goddamn chore. Reading, map making, reading, monster prepping, reading, finding obscure rules referenced in that reading, answering players' questions about if they can get a battle cat or not, and even more reading. It gets to be a lot, and you start to feel it. And when you feel it, the players also feel it. They can tell you think this is a chore, and they're going to respond with even more disinterest. I mean, I get it. At first, you're excited. And then you prep so much stuff because your mind is in a sandbox made of sugar. And that's where you need to stop. Get some help. You're working on a lot of things that may never even see the light of day. Whether that's the moment with an obscure NPC you think they could bump into who summons 3 demons to sacrifice the party to get his soul back. Or that cool-ass battle with an NPC rival you've been setting up that's going to occur in 6 arcs from now that you'll never get to because your game will be dead by then.
But what if they want to come across Demon Man and I don't have it prepared? How on earth will I get that cool payoff if I don't set it up now? How do I work this? Where is that large automobile? This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife.
Well, here's the secret. It's the same as it ever was. You need surprise in your game too. You are too busy trying to surprise your players because that's what good DMs do. But you aren't leaving enough surprise for yourself. And I'll get back to that in a second, but as we both know, the players have probably checked out by now because the last few minutes weren't about them. Players. You are being trained to be too passive. Your autonomy is being cucked. Rise! Throw off the shackles assigned to you by the designer class. Okay. But for real, the game is not incentivizing you to feel any sense of autonomy. The entire DM to player dynamic inherently robs you of the ability to affect the world around you.
But I can make attacks and say I'm doing something or talk to people.
But can you? You consent, and the DM consents. But isn't there someone you forgot to ask? Your most essential decisions are often dictated strictly by RNG. What if you decide you want to attack that weak goblin? The dice may just say no, and now you have no autonomy on your own skills anymore, level 10 fighter. And that's not just me. Paizo's Pathfinder 2nd edition changed their critical success and failure system to try and subvert this. In that system now, if you fail or succeed by 10 on an attack, you crit one way or the other. So now not only can you slice a goblin like cake, its frail arms will almost never stab through your toned, rippled body.
So what does it all mean then? Why the fuck am I playing? Why do any work if I can't even slice a goblin like cake?
That's actually the common attitude I see from players whether they realize it or not. Your DM asks you to make a backstory, but it doesn't affect the game in any way. You're asked for a description, but who even remembers that? So why do this work if I can't impact the world with it? That's what gets trained into the players. As a GM, I've tried to give more control to the players in our shared world, but they freeze. They aren't used to that power. They've never felt like they were playing in a shared world. They always felt like they were playing in someone else's.
So what then, you smallmouth fuck? How do I play quote-unquote right?
Well, clearly the answer I've been coming to is to re-examine our relationship between control and everyone at the table. By changing how control at the table forms, we find a much more balanced workload to payoff ratio. So let's explore 3 different approaches to control: embracing creativity, inspiration, and random tables. When players make up details about the world, embrace it. Players should be rewarded for their creativity, and the sooner the better. It's the easiest way to nurture and harvest involvement from a player. For example, in the Not Another D&D podcast, a player and DM decided that his character would be a kind of Boy Scout as a paladin, and that he was working his way up in the Boy Scout ranks. And he played it pretty goofy, and the DM was still trying to enforce a tone of, this is not a cartoon. But the game really got off the ground when they found a middle ground which required the DM to also meet the players partway, in ways they improvised details about the world and so forth. When they saved the Boy Scouts' friends, they immediately were a reflection of how the player was treating the Boy Scouts and his community in that world. And eventually, when they met his family, they also reflected his personality, even if it was a bit goofy in that middle-class suburban lifestyle. And now let's look over at a stream show called Swindler's Den. Arguably one of the most impactful arcs of their show Amoris is when they visit a town called Keijo. And what made that impactful is a player filling that town with life before they even got there. It made the town into a character of its own, and that wouldn't have happened if the player didn't feel comfortable enough adding to that world and the DM didn't let it pay off. Oh, now that I think about it, Not Another D&D podcast had a similar situation with a similar town. Oh, cancel the video. I guess the answer is to make your entire world a hillbilly forest. Okay, if you don't like making your world into a hillbilly forest, your answer is simply just to reciprocate the work the players are trying to do for you. That's right. It's about getting your players to prep the game for you. I mentioned earlier that you shouldn't plan too far ahead. And that's because emergent design is the lifeblood of letting players have control over the world. In a game I was running, I had an entire town that the players could explore, and there was like a mystery, stolen identity, and there was like a subplot of murders that could have added to clues. And I had like 8 NPCs, all with kind of directions to each other, that were all kind of a way to get the players to get off course and have a little fun and not solve it too fast. However, they immediately attached themselves to an NPC I made up on the fly, and they thought he was the murderer for a month in game. They spent 70% of their time interacting with that one NPC. So I had to do what I had to do and make him important to the plot, and make him someone they could use as a resource, even if they didn't actually do it. I tried to make him a resource. They were just too suspicious. But honestly, I eventually they could use him as a job opportunity in the future. If your players are interacting with people, they should matter in some way or another. If they feel like their actions matter and impact the world, they will be more invested in building that world the same way you did at Session 1. And the sooner they see this matters, the sooner they will engage. I'm sure you planned for their backstory to matter in 7 arcs from now. But again, your game will be dead by then. Make their world matter now. If they ask if there's a wizard's tower in town, if they claim they have a childhood best friend who lives in town, If it doesn't directly contradict parts of the game, why can't their claims be true? It shows you're willing to give up control and that they matter. Paul Williams once said in a cameo in Dexter's Lab, "Here comes inspiration!" It's built in. Actually, the game has a built-in incentive. And you don't use it right. Why don't you? Because you have 1,000 things to keep track of. But, to be fair, inspiration is a bit weak anyway. It gives you advantage on a roll, which is nice, but lacking. Inspiration is brought up in 4 books. The PHP and the DMG both just give the same basic mechanic. If they RP in character or do something in character, give out inspiration. But you can only have 1 point at a time, and you have it or you don't. I doubt your DM is being liberal with that either. But hey, wait. The Princes of Apocalypse and Mythic Odysseys of Theros both mention inspiration. Theros suggests giving inspiration when your piety score goes up, and the Princes of Apocalypse suggests giving it to when a player accomplishes their plot hook. This is better. A mechanical reason to give inspiration will see more play than a use it at your discretion.
Well, ideas, bonds, and flaws are part of a system.
But there's no incentive for a DM to award inspiration for you role-playing like you should be doing already. And let me introduce you to another game real quick, which I think may help explain what I mean. Fate, a game by Evil Hat. One of the most core mechanics in this game is rewarding your players through roleplay. Their character creation system is essentially phrases and descriptions. So instead of race or class, you have aspects, such as your high concept could be, quote, warrior from the beyond, end quote. Or your flaw might be, quote, frighteningly ugly, end quote. That's a tough word. That's it. There's no stats to those phrases.
Now, I thought you said that there's no incentive, and if there's no actual stats to those phrases, isn't that loosey-goosey?
Well, the core mechanic of Fate is the use of the Fate points, which are basically inspiration as a currency. You can use Fate points to reroll dice, add +2 to a roll, spend to use powerful skills, and most apt to introduce in-game details. But first, let's circle back to the aspects. They are the main way you gain or use Fate points. When you roll an attack, for instance, you may fail your result. So you can say, because you're a, quote, warrior from the beyond, I have a fighting style that they haven't seen before, and I spend a Fate point to get a +2 to my attack. Thus, you are rewarded for finding a way that your character matters in that moment. So you spent a Fate point. How do you get one back? Well, when you concede a conflict, you gain one, but most importantly, when your personality traits come back to bite you in the butt. So you need to convince the Duke that you should be allowed to go into the private forest to find a world-saving artifact, but you are frighteningly ugly. I think I got it that time. So your DM offers a Fate point for this to go poorly, and you can accept a mechanical reward for embracing your character's traits. Though in that game, you can also spend a Fate point back to say, no, I really need a chance at this regardless of how ugly I am. It's important. I'm not trying to convince you to play Fate, though you should. I'm saying there's useful tools we can pull from the game for inspiration. I mentioned they can spend points to introduce details into the world. This goes back to embracing creativity. I understand there isn't always times where it feels like they should get something for free. But what if you expanded what inspiration could do mechanically? Let inspiration be used to say there's a wizard's tower, or that your friend lives in town. Now, there's a currency that balances out requests. Inspiration should be much more involved in your games if you aren't using it already. It could be the most direct mechanical way to give your players control in the world. But like I said, there's no hard rule for when to give it out, just at discretion. Well, looking back at Fate, make your ideals, bonds, and flaws something you can activate for inspiration. Offer inspiration to make a player change their minds about something. Let players ask for inspiration for activating their ideals. And be generous. Let them stockpile inspiration. But you still feel like it's too wishy-washy, right? Well, let's look at a game by the Game Design from Scratch podcast. They are making a game with a mechanic called momentum, where you gain momentum for doing cool shit and then spend it to keep doing cool shit. There's so many hardline rules you can use to introduce inspiration. Like, when someone gets a crit, give them inspiration for being so badass. Another game that has a similar mechanic is the Star Wars role-playing game by Fantasy Flight. You have a pool of destiny points that have a light and dark side, and the players and DM flip them as a give and take to do cool things. So, at times, your DM is rewarding you light points for screwing you over too. Why not use inspiration that way? When you crit fail, gain an inspiration. When the DM uses a legendary resistance against your spell, inspiration. D&D, I think, has the most limited version of this tool that I've seen, and you should find a hard mechanical way to earn it, and new, unique ways to spend it. You may think there's no reason to change how you earn it, but if you don't find new ways to spend and store inspiration, your players won't have any incentive to try and earn it in the first place. Play Fate! I used to think random charts were neat, but hard to implement. It felt like everything was disjointed and took the game to a screeching halt. But once I stopped trying to control the future, they became fun again. The DM needs surprise. Our curiosity isn't being activated when we basically know how the whole game is going to go. You should leave room for things you didn't plan. Embracing random charts are a great way to surprise ourselves. Creativity expresses itself best when there is a problem or obstacle limiting you. That's what makes puzzles so fun. If you are intimidated by this concept, though, or it's too wacky for your game, let me explain the two ways I use them now. 1. Emergent use. I keep open a random list of names, a list of random encounters for the terrain I'm in, and a random list of player motivations. The name list is pretty self-explanatory. Sometimes you just need to give a lot of people names, and at some point, you just tend to say the same 10 names, and this is just a way to avoid that. Where we're going to see the most controversy here, though, is the random list of encounters. There are always things on the list that hardline feel like breaks immersion. You may be tempted to re-roll, but that brings two problems. First, why even use a random chart? Why not just plan encounters? And second, for every time you re-roll, you're just adding time to the wait in action. Trust me, and stick with the roll you get. There's two ways to embrace it that will add fun to your game and add surprise for you. First, reskin it. There isn't a tribe of hobgoblins in this forest. They're actually boar people who live here in Boar Forest. Second, is now you have a puzzle that wasn't in your control at first. Much like a player, you're getting a new detail and can investigate it. Why is there a drake here? Well, now you can solve that. Maybe, just maybe, your player's background has something to do with it. So also, I have the list of player motivations. These are things I know that drive players from their backstory or current developments. If I need a way to connect an event, NPC, encounter, or any emergent information, I look back to the list. This one I don't always roll on if something's obviously connected, but the real fun for all of these tables is how do I connect these events? That's the puzzle I get to solve. That's where my curiosity gets activated and I get surprised at the table that I need to stay engaged. Okay, number 2, I use it for brainstorming. I like to prep. I like coming up with the world. I'm sure you do too, and that's why you hated random charts. But when you prep all of these things so far in advance, you are putting in a lot of workload with almost no payoff. Things change between now and then, and players do not always do what you think they will. In fact, they never do what you think they will. They will talk to that NPC that you made up on the spot, and they will think he is the bad guy for a whole month in game. So I try to focus on the most immediate area at a time, and we build up the world as we go. Random charts help that. I come up with a lot of things like ecology and customs based on the inspiration from the rolls. Sometimes the whole problem in the area becomes immediately apparent when I see what I've rolled. You can still have a through line. Maybe this problem is just another symptom of the main plot and you can add the clues as you need here. But you no longer need to plot the whole damn game. You let the game plot its damn self for you. My tools and answers aren't set in stone, and it doesn't always apply to every game or group. But as someone who's seen a lot of games fail, I wanted to give a look at it and see why it kept happening, and why it appears as a trope in the community as a whole. My main point here is, look at how you can distribute control and workload in your games to give everyone a reason to make your game a priority. Also play Fate. Hey everybody, it's your boy Bumblescum. I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to this and getting all the way through it. It's my first time making a video like this. I hope it was entertaining enough. It was 4 times the length I thought it was going to be, so there's that. If you'd like to see more from me at the Interdimensional Library, you can always follow the Interdimensional Library on Twitter at IDL_RPGS. Or you can always find our podcast on either Spotify or iTunes or my website at bumblescum.com/IDL. Otherwise, you can always check out our Patreon. All I have got up there right now is I'm working on subclasses and tokens. I'd love to keep putting up more supplements and other things like that. Just let me know if there's things you'd like to see, maybe maps or races. I'm working on like 2 small collection books right now for it, but yeah, thanks you all for watching. Subscribe and like and ring the bell.